can hear me all right? Yeah. So I'll walk around a little bit, and it's going to be interactive too. So we're going to, don't fall asleep. I'll point at you, and I learned a few people's names, like Ben up here, so he already volunteered to answer some questions for us. So what I'm going to really focus on is it's going to be a pretty stark contrast to what you guys have been seeing the past few days, some extremely smart scientists. I'm very much in the application space, right? So the changeover would be, how do you take something that they've developed in a lab and package that up, de-risk it, mass produce it to sell to the general public to satisfy some need that they have. At its core, that's really what product development is. So I'll give a little background on General Motors and the scale at which we operate. Talk about product development 101, which is the simple part, like if you want to be an entrepreneur, and we'll do kind of an example. Talk about product development at scale, which is what GM is really good at. Deep dive a little bit into a specific, so that truck out there, I was on the program team when it was in the pre-production phase, so I'm going to walk through kind of like a day in the life and what that timeline looked like. It's very long. We'll then kind of go have a quick conversation about what you guys think innovation is, and how do you balance those new crazy ideas with like a machine that is enormous that one person cannot just change on their own. And then finally some takeaways and questions. So I want to start introducing myself. Really, this is like my college profile, since you guys are going to college. So here's some interesting stuff I did in college. So I did play basketball at MIT, undergraduate. Yeah, studied, went to the Final Four, the Division III Final Four. So it was awesome. Studied material science and engineering, joined a fraternity, joined the Hawaii Club, because I was interested in a girl in the Hawaii Club. Subsequently embarrassed myself hula dancing. Learned how to be a meteorologist. I was a lab rat for some interesting experiments at MIT. They have a lot of that. I think most schools do. So there's, you get paid to do. We ran up and down and watched horror movies, and they monitored heart rate and stuff. Learned how to weld and cast a machine and kind of work with my hands and stuff, which is very different from what you usually learn in college, which is kind of theoretical stuff. I did, under a microscope, stitch together muscle byssus threads. So these are the muscles you eat, not your body muscles. And to study the hydrophobicity, so that was kind of some research I got to do. I really loved teaching, I learned through that. So after I played basketball for 2 years and then moved into just teaching solid state chemistry, which was like the intro class for the major I was in, and really fell in love with teaching and got to teach one of the first online courses. So anyone heard of edX.org? Yeah, so MIT and Harvard pioneered that when I was an undergrad. It wasn't open to the public yet, and some of the first classes that they did was this intro to solid state chemistry. And I was right on the ground floor. I got to write a bunch of code on how to solve, people can submit answers to problems. So that was a blast. And then summers, so I went home my first summer because I couldn't get an internship, coached basketball at high school. Went to Spain and did ballistic research, and then went back to Texas, worked for Bell Helicopter in their manufacturing site. So kind of, I picked the best things. I didn't put the embarrassing things on there. Just one, just some ambiguous embarrassment stuff. But then it's kind of a range for you guys to think about when you go to college, right? There's a million things. I didn't think I would do really any of these things, because I was just some guy from Texas who only played basketball. So it's a chance for you to kind of redefine yourself and stretch your limits. So real quick, GM, our mission statement is not to build the best cars and trucks. It used to be. It's 0 crashes, 0 emissions, 0 congestion, which at a high level is it changes the core mentality from we are a vehicle product development company to we're willing to try other things to achieve this objective. So it's an interesting time to work for General Motors. The autonomous stuff is extremely interesting. We've committed to huge strides in electrification. So all battery electric vehicles, we announced we're working on a battery electric truck. So a version of what's outside, but purely electric. So they're exciting time. Everything's changing within the company. We sell under 4 brands in the United States: Chevrolet, GMC, Cadillac, and Buick. So if you see those driving, no one ever answers that question, right? So I stopped asking it. And then I want a little bit about the scale. So since 2010, I went and found, because we're a public company, you can go onto a federal website and look up, I think it's called a 10K, but it's a public disclosure about how much money we spend and make and stuff. So we've made 80 million vehicles we've produced globally since 2010. We've spent over $1.3 trillion paying people, buying parts. This obviously cascades into a lot of other, keeping whole companies afloat because we're buying parts from them. And then the employment thing is another way to think about kind of the impact of it. Hundreds of thousands of people over time, employed globally. And right now, I think we're about 140, technically just for General Motors in the United States, which is a lot of people, right? So how do you get those? So product development, right, is how do you marshal these resources to do something, right? It's incredibly complex when you really get into the weeds on it. And this is an example as well as kind of our presence in the United States, in just North America specifically. Manufacturing plants, engineering facilities, we have whole separate information technology facilities, innovation centers, huge presence across the United States, right? And this comes from the footprint of making vehicles. So why does good product development matter? Why do you even have to be able to do it, right? So this is an example of the first one here. And I'll make fun of General Motors products for a little bit, then give a little love to our friends at Ford. So this one I recognize this from like Hot Wheels. We did a great job like getting Hot Wheels to produce a lot of these, right? But that doesn't make us too much money. But after just 1 year after launch, they had to lay off people over the course of 5 weeks, which is really bad. Most vehicle programs are designed to at least be in production for 3 to 4 years. And only 24,000 sold. So if you think about the investment to do a new vehicle in terms of all the new, so when you stamp a body panel, you need these big metal tools that are extremely expensive, take a year to produce, right? That's just one example, but there's a lot of effort put into this. So to only sell 24,000 is pretty bad. Anyone heard of the DeLorean?
Yeah!
Yeah, Back from the Future, yes. Again, marketing good, product bad. But DeLorean actually, there's a cool book about it, but he was an executive from General Motors who was like a rabble-rouser and like partied with celebrities instead of like staying in Michigan and working really hard internally, And then he's like, oh, I can do this better, I'm going to start my own company. They were delayed 2 years due to engineering issues. And again, this is like the holy grail of like what not to do in a big company. It's like whenever anyone says, oh my gosh, you're going to delay a program, like everybody stops what they're doing and tries to fix it. Because it's really bad. Everything is so timed up perfectly across the company. Delaying is really bad. Only 12,000 produced. Again, like I said, imagine the resources put in to only make 12,000. And there's different like theories on how many were even sold. No one even knows how many were sold. They were produced in Ireland. And then of course their CEO was bankrupt. He was caught with a lot of cocaine, I think, actually. Now here's the Ford example. Anyone heard of the Lincoln Blackwood? That's their kind of luxury brand. So they made a pickup truck, like ultra luxury, like the bed was carpeted and locked. Yeah, like it's kind of an interesting concept. But there was an interest, they destroyed a relationship with one of their suppliers because the bed was delivered so late, right? So imagine a company saying, oh, hey, I'm going to pay you to build me 20,000 of the pickup bed, and it needs to arrive on these dates, and you have the whole other thing work, and then that doesn't show up. Can't really sell pickups without the bed, right? Pretty important part. And almost every part of the vehicle you have to have ready for that timing. So they only made 3,300, which is atrocious, right? And the final models were sold at loss. And look at the timing as well, right? Like I said, vehicle programs, because of the investment, are really only profitable if you push them over many years. And so to only sell for maybe less than one for the Lincoln, maybe 2 years is not very good product development, right? So and there's a million reasons why it could have gone wrong. No one will know for sure except for those chief engineers launching the product. The other reason it matters is if you think you have a good idea, act on it. Like if you want to be an entrepreneur, do a startup, all that stuff is very hip these days. Entrepreneurship is very sexy. Go do it. The product development thing is not that hard when you're starting small in a startup. It's really just effort. There's plenty of resources online. Hopefully you'll take away some basic things from this lecture. But if you guys go to college and you're like, hey, man, I wish there was a robot delivering food for me and it's not on my campus. Like, you could probably build a robot, or find some people who can build you a robot, and then just start giving people's money to bring them food, right? It's hard, but not impossible. So product development is a very simple equation. It's really an input-output model. You need people. You need some sort of resources, and the resources can be cash to pay people usually. The hammer is supposed to represent expertise, like do I know how to build this or how to deliver this? And then the factory is supposed to be space. You don't always need a factory, especially if you're doing something software. That's why you look at Silicon Valley and you see how many products come out. Software is very easy, right? In terms of resources, it's difficult to actually do the coding, but you can do it on your own personal computer without anybody paying you for it, right? So it's pretty amazing to lower the barrier to entrepreneurship. And then the launch thing is supposed to be launching a product on the right. And the definition of product here, this is what I found in Google: an article or substance that is manufactured or refined for sale. So I translated that: anything that someone else will use and pay for. Right? So that's kind of the distinction between, you know, a lot of, I work a lot of startups at MIT, and there's a lot of them that want to go do good in the world, but not necessarily make it a product, right? They don't want anyone to pay for it, which is great. But that's a little bit different from, you know, actually building a business. It's more of a charitable giving type thing. And it really has one core theme, especially in like the technical mindset here: design, build, test. And you can add multiple iterations of this. You can digest these, right? The General Motors design organization is many thousands of people, right? So you can't just tell them all go design, right? You have to kind of break that down across a huge organization. And then if you're going to be an entrepreneur, you have to take care of the other things on your own, which are raising the resources. So this is like, you've heard of a pitch maybe, right? You have to go pitch somebody, hey, my idea and what I can do and me is worth giving me some money to go do it, or some space, or some resources, whatever it may be. And then you got to sell it on the back end, right? So you're kind of spoiled within GM as an engineer, because you don't have to think in any big company, right? If you can just be an engineer, just be a scientist, just be a program integrator, you know, you don't have to focus on this whole thing. You can get really deep into one discipline. But if you're an entrepreneur, probably gonna do it all yourself. So let's do a quick interactive one here. You're a product manager for a coffee mug, right? So let's talk through here. You know, here's the resources we're gonna need, some backdrop, but what's the first thing you gotta do? What's the first thing someone has to do, the hat they have to wear? Anyone? A leader, yeah, okay. Someone to kind of hold other people accountable and set deadlines and say, hey, what's the vision? What do we want to build, right? The leader, we'll say I'm the leader, I say, hey, we're building a coffee mug. We got to do it in 2 months, right? We got to deliver it to someone via Amazon. So what's the first thing I need to, who's the first person I need to hire? Or the first thing I need to do? Yeah? Clay person to make the mug. I'd argue we're almost jumping ahead of ourselves, right? Yeah.
I think someone to design like what the mug's gonna look like.
Exactly, a designer. And so if you look into careers, designer is someone who distills, basically they say, oh, I want a coffee mug. They're like, what does that mean? Does that mean 2 handles? Does that mean red or black, or, you know, made of stainless steel, made of clay, right? The designer takes all these things in the ethos and kind of justifies them with some very interesting methodologies that are really cool to learn about if you ever get to hear a presentation by someone who's like a designer. Super cool things to listen to. But yeah, we need a designer to kind of spec out, and ideally designers are also very closely connected with the user, right? They're like, hey, you know, you didn't say who we're building this coffee mug for. I'm going to kind of go watch how people use coffee mugs today. How can we make it better, right? Maybe people need two cups, or it needs to be auto-warming, right? Something like that. So the designer first, right? What's next, even before we start building it? Yeah?
Market research?
Market research, yeah. Market research is, it depends on the scale. Let's say for a coffee mug, maybe we don't need too much market research because we're like, people who drink coffee. Okay, good. But yeah, in bigger things you do need that, yeah. Resources, yeah. So that would be me trying to, you know, get some cash to either pay those people to work for me, or find my friends who are willing to work alongside me, or even some capital to eventually buy raw material to make the mug. But what's between I'm designing the mug and I'm making the mug? Yeah.
You need the machines that make the mug, so
Yeah, so we have to define how we're going to make the mug, if that makes sense. So again, we're getting like very granular, but these are kind of the steps. You know, yes, you could probably just build the mug, but you might forget something, right? So having like an engineer or someone who like puts their engineering release hat on and says, you know, hey, we need this sort of thickness and this machine can do that, this sort of material properties. We're going to source the material from this, you know, art store, whatever it may be. Then, yeah, after you design it, get to build it, right? And you have to find the people to build it, the space to build it. You know, coffee mugs, honestly, you could probably go online and say, hey, I want to make my personal coffee mug, and do that, right? And if you know, a lot of entrepreneurs I see at MIT as well, sometimes they'll just travel to China or Mexico, which are really some of the manufacturing hubs globally, and just find a factory and make that personal relationship that's not online and say, hey, can you make me this thing? And a lot of like those factories are crazy capable. They can make almost anything just from scratch, right? And sometimes you don't have to worry about material selection until the end. But okay, now we've made our mug. what's the last few things you got to do? Yeah.
Test it.
Test it. Good one. So we got to test the mug, right? We don't want to sell a mug that's like, oh, I made it, and maybe like they forgot to fire it, right? It's like just ceramic droop or something. You know, and you're like, oh, just put it on Amazon and sell it directly to the consumer. No, we want to test that. We want to make sure they made it correctly. We want to make sure it's as durable as we need it to, right? The testing connects back to the design, right? Because the design guys are saying, okay, it needs to withstand these few things. Our engineer we hired is going to say, here are the requirements for it. Now the testing needs to say, did we meet those requirements, right? And testing also is sometimes adding new requirements based on what you find. So testing is a pretty interesting discipline. So after testing, what's the last thing? Yeah.
You should decide how to sell it. Like you're gonna have like a storefront or like an online thing.
Exactly. Yeah. So for the coffee mug, you know, I decided we're just going to sell on Amazon, make it real easy, so we can focus on the core technical product level. But yeah, that's something. If you're an entrepreneur, how do you want to sell, right? If you think about vehicles. We use dealerships to sell vehicles today for a variety of reasons, but there might be other ways, right? Tesla's tried to do direct to consumer, right? There's things like Carvana, if you guys have heard of it, that they'll deliver you a vehicle to test drive, and if you don't like it, they'll take it back, which is a very different distribution model, right? But for the coffee mug, we'll say we'll sell it on Amazon, make it nice and easy. So, all right, so congratulations, you guys just you're now certified product managers to be a product manager for coffee mug. So. Yeah. Have applause. So now we're going to get a little bit deeper into what that means at scale. So I have some cool GIFs here. GIF, not GIF. But if you see here, so all these things are from the truck plan excerpts. So these are frames. So that's the thing all the stuff sits on top of. And this is the scale at which we do business, right? And this is, like, to me, when you walk in here, right, you see these people, how small they are. This is like a wonder of the world. Like, how do you get that much metal in the right shape, repeatably, delivered on time? I mean, even the delivery's crazy. These things are huge. You can only fit a handful onto a box truck at a time, right? How do you, like, measure the delivery shipments so that they don't take up too much space in the factory and they get there on time, right? You get here's some of the hand installs that people do with tools. Think about, look, you can just see all the pieces, right? Some engineer, whether it was a product engineer or manufacturing engineer, somebody had to design and spec every single piece and process that was used, right? So these are just two, relatively small. I mean, the engine, I guess, is pretty big. But the engine had its own process before it even gets to this point. But every little process is so scripted, right? And that's really what engineers do in big companies. You're finding new processes, new ways of doing things, and you're the one who's got to script it out. You got to put the requirements on there. You got to figure out what you need to test to, how we're going to pilot it, stuff like that. And then you look at the robotics, right? So again, there's a whole nother discipline of engineering that controls robotics, right? Like what Nick was saying earlier. These are not, unfortunately, the super robust AI robots. Like you said, these are dumb robots, right? But you still need people to say, okay, how do you control the electric motors and the geometry of the robots that it moves in this exact position? A lot of times, too, the robots are touching the vehicle as the vehicle's moving itself. Right? So how do you, there's a lot of moving parts, and these things are so powerful, right? If you mess it up, you're going to destroy some metal. Safety's gotten a lot better, but right when robots were at the forefront in the manufacturing centers, it was pretty dangerous. Like if you got hit by a robot, there's no cutoff switch. There was no sensor to tell the robot was hitting you. It could chop your arm off, right? Very dangerous. But they've gotten a lot better. You see the precision. They're working together. But again, at scale, right? We can't just have person by person slowly putting putting body sealer and some welds into the vehicle. We need the robots to go faster and do it really well, right? And this was, someone asked me yesterday at the truck, the bed and the cab, two pieces. So again, these are two pieces that are held separately, the bed of the truck and the cab. And this again is the precision, yes, these are enormous things, but you have tolerances in the millimeters, right? And if you miss that tolerance, right, you're going to crush a radiator, you're going to crush some poor thing, you might damage the machine, and then stop the production, right? Which is, we engineer everything to be, you have to have the production on, 2 or 3 shifts per day. And then finally, so that was kind of the build scale, right? This is kind of the durability, right? That someone mentioned the testing earlier in our product development sheet. The durability is an important piece too, because a vehicle, like other products, right, people have very high expectations. You don't want to get your vehicle and drive it, over a bump and then the wheel just falls off. That would kind of suck. So we have a ton of testing yet to do as well. So not think about, hey, how do we just build something at scale, but how do we test it at scale? Now we'll get a little bit into that, but right, how do you test things? We sell our vehicles with like 10-year plus warranties, where if something breaks, bring it back, we'll fix it. So we need to test for that, obviously, but we don't take 10 years to drive it around, normal usage, right? So how do you engineer a test that represents 10 years of real world use, compressed to a year, ideally? Perfect, over here. And the last one here is, again, just the quantity. We do 64 trucks per hour out of our plants. Pretty fast, right? And the machine is moving fast, people are moving fast, it's intense, right? So just a lot of, mass moving around. So, get into a little bit of the science behind it now, but when you add scale, you need to add the cycles, and you need to break up each of those define build tests into different groups and settings, right? Especially for large organizations. Thousands of people, which is what's necessary to build at the scale we build at, right? We make about $150 billion of revenue a year, right? And we spend almost all of it, or more of it, and lose money sometimes. But it's incredible, honestly, to build something that makes that much money, right? For an organization, but to do that, you've got to be able to architect the organization, right? And that's where the bureaucracy comes in. Yes, it's necessary to some point. It definitely sucks to work in, right? Jadelle and I can definitely attest to that. But at the end of the day, some of it is necessary so that we know what to do as kind of young engineers. When someone at the top is agreeing to say, hey, as the leader of the engineering organization, we agreed to build this, 1 million copies of this truck per year for 6 years, right? That person has to then translate that into work for thousands, tens of thousands of people. And here's an example, again, the 3D modeling, the component testing, right? You think about vehicle, you have component, subsystem, full vehicle testing, a lot of different pieces, 20,000 plus individual pieces on any one vehicle, 30 plus computers, software standpoint, huge scale. Pre-production builds, production testing. And then you think, once you build this organization too, it's kind of a side of product development, but that's where you create the other organizations I listed here, right? IT, HR, recruiting, legal, finance, administration, R&D, and then ventures and acquisitions. There's probably even more I didn't put on here, but that's kind of justifies a lot of why organizations are so big, is right, because if I have engineers I want doing engineering, I don't want them finding new employees for me. I don't want them having to deal with how to get paid. I don't want them to have to deal with buying and speccing a new computer for themselves. I just want to give them a computer I know is competent for what they need, right? Especially when you get to cybersecurity in there for big organizations, and product plans are very important to keep secret, right? So my computer is pretty well locked down, unless you came and tackled me before I could lock it, I guess. So there's 3 stages we're going to get into. So the first one is before we even decide to do anything. What does that look like, right? And this is all the different hats you wear. And GM, being a big company, is very helpful to look at that, because if you were designing the coffee mug, right, you probably have to think through just out of your head. You might miss one, right? But at GM, the things are so big, there's so many people, no one's going to forget anything, right? So you have, these are the main staples here: creative design, resource allocation. So do we have the capital to buy new machines, new plants? Do we have space to build it, right? Market forecasting, and because the timeline's longer, you gotta be able to do that. Hey, we're gonna build this truck and start mass producing a brand new version in 6+ years. Will people be buying cars at that point? Will they be willing to pay what we need them to pay? What sort of features do they want, right? This one's hard because it's kind of like predicting the future, which is impossible to do. So it's very challenging. They kind of get crapped on a lot because a lot of times they miss very reasonably. It's not possible to predict the future. The brand identity, right? So again, within a big company, we're kind of limited. We only have 4 brands in the United States we can sell to, and we're not interested in creating any brand new ones at this time. And we had to kill off a lot of brands. 2009, 2010, the bankruptcy, like Hummer, Pontiac, Oldsmobile. We were selling them under a bazillion brands. It got really hard to tell them apart. For the average person to walk onto a lot and say, "Oh, I really want this Pontiac instead of this Oldsmobile," if they look the same and have the same features, how do you sell one versus the other? And then finally, corporate strategy, and that's the mission I said, right? So the 0 crashes, 0 emissions, 0 congestion, that's the direction of the vehicles we want to build, right? So That means we're not going to make tanks, we're not going to make airplanes, right? We're building, at this point, it doesn't say vehicles, but our expertise is in vehicles, so our vehicles need to go in that direction. So that's kind of the people that have to come together and put together big reports and, why should we do this, justify it, and then, not arguing, but healthy discussion between them, right? And I like it, has anyone done that big parachute game? Where, everyone pulls back and the parachute gets off the ground? That's what we have to do here, right? Everyone pulls back towards their mentality as hard as possible. Make sometimes the opposite direction, but in the middle is something that is reasonable that we can build and make money off, and will satisfy people's lives at one point. And then the stakeholders here, these are kind of the catchers, right? So these people are planning, hey, I want to build this. Engineering, manufacturing, and innovation is there, just kind of hey, are we thinking differently enough? Kind of just the why person in the room. But engineering and manufacturing, basically, you have to employ them to say, can we build that? Is that even possible? If our planning people said, hey, we got to do a flying car in 2 years, engineering would be like, what are you talking about? We can't do that, right? So again, you have to have all the different stakeholders in the room, and translating this to yourselves, right? If you're going to be entrepreneurs, you just got to make sure you put on all these hats, right? I'm going to take off my creative design hat and think, okay, I'm going to critique that from the engineering perspective. Does that work? Is that possible, right? Now the stage 2 is really the prototyping and testing, right? And I've broken it down here. You have what we call, can anyone describe what systems engineering is? Or take a guess, it's okay if you're wrong. Yeah?
Is it you're trying to understand mechanisms behind the certain functions in the overall machine? If you look at a piece, for example, for the engine is that specific, the way, the flow, and things like that.
Yeah, exactly. So they're I think of it as a tree. They're making these trees of functionality. Okay, start with the high level, the vehicle has to drive, right? Okay, that means we need wheels, that means we need an engine, that means we need a transmission, all these other pieces. Now you say, okay, we have wheels. The wheels have to be able to support some weight, you got to be able to drive for hundreds of thousands of miles, they can't overheat, right? So systems engineering starts putting all the requirements in place, right? But we'll kind of get into discussion about this later, but you can't just do them all in series either, you have to stagger them. So it's kind of interesting, how do you stagger them appropriately, right? That's kind of one of the internal debates we always have. It's oh, can't we just make everyone start at the same time? It's well, maybe, right? But we're kind of lose the whole benefit of systems engineering if everybody's doing the same work at the same time. So it's a very interesting kind of discussion to have. Advanced engineering, where they're just looking into, this is 3D modeling, right? So you see those cool videos of people making 3D models of the truck or components of it or something. That's what the advanced engineering, and hey, does it all fit together? Do we make it out of metal, plastic? Very high-level, quick-hitter stuff, right? So we have just a sketch, basically. Then you get into the component and subsystem testing, right? Which is, we don't even need to commit to build a vehicle at this point, right? There's always outs, because you always want to give yourself outs and say, hey, if we don't hit, if we don't think we have confidence that it's going to work, we should, just kill it, right? And go spend our resource on something else, because we don't want to 7 years in advance commit to billions and billions of dollars of spending, and then halfway through realize, oh, this is not going to work, but just keep doing it, right? We want to give ourselves outs to say, okay, maybe this isn't right, let's pivot, let's try something new. So my hypothesis is that this is kind of an interesting area to put it out before you actually build full vehicles, because you can always buy onesie, twosie component, it's cost money, you have people on it, but before you build a full vehicle, it's kind of a delta in how much money you're spending and how much time it's going to take. So you get to the pre-production builds, full vehicle testing, integration engineering. And then the third one you get here, it's kind of hard to see here, but another dotted line of is that another area for an out, right? Or a big commitment. Everyone needs to come together and say, hey, we're in it. Is everyone, everyone's comfortable? Everyone's confident? We're going to keep going, right? And spend a lot more money, a lot more resources. But that's when you start to employ really further than engineering, right? Purchasing and supply chain. So those frames I told you, right? So if an engineer said, hey, I need the frames to look like this, we have a whole other team that is, okay, who in the world can make this quantity of metal frames to these requirements? Right? It's a pretty interesting question, right? How do you know who does that, right? You kind of got to travel around, have people submit samples, and the scale is very difficult too, right? It makes it, my job with an open innovation is very hard because traditionally this means we can't work with startups. Because we got to go find people who can build millions of copies of the same thing. Startups can't do that, right? It's very difficult. Maybe software is a little bit different. But in general, this is kind of why we've worked with trusted partners globally, because we know they can give us what we need, right? And over time you build this up, right, where you know who can kind of do what for you. Manufacturing plans construction, right? So, hey, the full production, do we need new welding machines, new robotics controls, more people, more space? Do we need to build a new plant? That's where they kind of like start doing that stuff. It's like, hey, we said we need a new plant, go buy the property, start building the buildings, hiring people, right? Kicking off a lot of work for other people to do, right? Marketing plans and sales strategy, just beginning to think, okay, how are we going to sell this thing, right? Do we use the dealerships? We said we're going to use the dealerships. Let's go talk to the dealerships, go to some conferences and conventions, maybe share some plans with the dealers. What do you think? Can you sell this? That sort of thing, right? How are we going to market it, right? TV, Facebook, whatever. I want to stop here and say, with this first line, right? Does anyone have any other perspectives on when is a good time to say, hey, we need to come together, we've done enough stuff, and we need to really do a recommitment, right? Anyone have any hypotheses about that, or a good time to do that in product development? Miss Samantha Space, yeah.
Maybe after full vehicle testing for safety purposes.
Yeah, good. So he said after full vehicle testing for safety purposes. That's a good call. So yeah, so once you figure out, hey, it's going to be safe, that's a good one, because then there's no excuse, right? Safety is always an excuse to stop something for a good reason, right? If anything ever shows up as unsafe, fails testing, we will easily delay programs for that. We will spend more resources to fix that, right? And so that's a good one. Any other thoughts on times when we should kind of sit down, should we continue or not? Yeah.
Before you ramp up production and scale.
Yeah, that's actually, I have another line on that. You're thinking ahead to the third stage when let's do production. But yeah, that's a good one. Yeah.
Maybe after advanced engineering, if the engineers figure out that your plan is actually going to work.
Yes, that is a great point. She said after advanced engineering. So I put the line kind of there, but right after advanced engineering, when they're done, think about desirability, viability, feasibility. Desirability is, does someone want it? Viability, doesn't make business sense. Feasibility is can we technically put it together to satisfy what the customer wants? So that's what the advanced engineering folks are doing. And that's a great point. We should stop after that and say, hey, is it possible? What are the tallest poles in the tent? Did we say they need a VR hologram display and our engineers have not found a way to do that? That's a pretty big thing, right? We don't want to just keep moving forward with the understanding that we can do that when we actually can. So what about this? What about the second one here? Before we start, kicking off bigger resource for construction, sales, marketing, and stuff. What's the ideal, even kind of higher level? Does anyone have any thoughts on when's a good point to start doing that stuff? Yeah.
Why make it discrete? Why not make it a continuous process? Where you're always, like when you're writing a paper on Word, you're always continuously editing. Why make it a discrete at this step or at this step?
Yeah, I think so. That's the perfect argument actually that we have every day. Why not make it a continuous process? Why do you even need these hard chalk lines? Why can't every day you're okay, if we find something that gives us some lack of confidence to do the whole plan, let's have a meeting and figure it out, right? And the answer is just simply resources for people's time. Unfortunately, it's kind of the balance, right? Because ideally you would. It should be Microsoft Word. Everyone's continuously uploading their documents, their errors, their issues, and automatically you get the red squiggly line, right? Hey, you got a typo. Ideally, we'd have a system that can kind of do that automatically for us. But at the end of the day, we still have a lot of older systems, and there's just a lot of people overhead. So it ends up being a drain on a lot of people's resources to put together presentations for, hey, are we ready for this, right? Has everyone, what's the documentation? There's a lot of efforts to do that in companies today. But that's kind of, the future. Ideally, it's all, automated, right? People's work is constantly being, looked at with an automated mindset, flagging things that are anomalies, right? But that's a really good point. So we'll move on here to stage 3. And this one's okay, we're doing it. We're sure we can build it. Satisfies customer requirements in advanced engineering. Let's scale it up, right? So we have something called release engineering. So release engineering is a little bit different from advanced engineering. This one is very much what are the finite requirements you're going to have to hit? And let's make sure they're all documented. Everyone knows about them, right? Let's go visit the supplier who's going to be building, seats or something, and say, hey, are they actually building seats? Have they done some work? Or do we know them personally, right? Are we confident they can do this? And then really, you're not trying to change things too much in the release engineering. You're just making sure you keep going. So whenever there's an issue, you just kill it immediately, right? So that's what a lot of our release engineers do. It's a different mindset, right, from that advanced engineering. So it's something for y'all to think about which one might be more interesting to you, or if, when you're coming out of college and doing internships, what area do you want to play in? Because the advanced space is great for kind of like blue sky design, but a lot of times, those people don't think too much about the realities of, hey, we can't build 1 million copies of this a year. It's not possible. And release engineers are going to have that perspective, right? They're going to say, hey, if there's any hint that we're not going to make it, I'm going to raise the issue, we're going to talk about it, we're going to kill it immediately, right? So that's kind of what and you follow it all the way through. So every piece on a vehicle has a single person behind it. So you could go pick a piece on a vehicle, tell me, I'll find the part number, I could look up someone's name, we could call them up and say, hey, tell me about this part. Which is kind of cool too, right? So release engineering, you get awesome ownership. That is like your part, even as an entry-level engineer, it's your part. Yes, there's a program team running the program, but like, you own the part. The cost, how we make it, how it gets to the plant. It's a really empowering position and awesome to learn from. Quality engineering, so they're kind of in parallel to the release engineering, make sure we do everything with very robust quality metrics, right? And that's kind of been a focus for the whole auto industry. You probably see articles on it sometimes. For the past 10 years, the auto industry has had a huge focus on improving first time and overtime quality, because we had a lot of issues where people, would get plastic that chips, or my parents had a truck that the dashboard just cracked one summer in the Texas heat. That sucks, right? I mean, it's something that, a lot of times automakers, they're like, hey, it's not decreasing functionality, so we're not going to replace it. So it's been a big focus to really get that quality under wraps, right? And I think we're kind of getting over the hump, being able to focus on newer things at this point. Manufacturing engineering, we'll just call that the robots, right? So designing the processes, the robotics, whatever needs to be done to put it together, right? And this one, actually, if you're interested in human factors, manufacturing engineering has a whole subsection called ergonomics, which is like you saw, we have people doing a lot of this, or doing it quickly, heavy objects. So is the tool we have capable of helping them lift something? Is it like an awkward angle for their body to screw something in? We don't want any of that, right? We want to make it super robust and easy. Getting into the early production builds, test engineering, and again, another kind of artificial chalk line, which is, okay, let's build. Actually, this one's less artificial, this is a real one. There's a day, you have a different team working on the early stuff, a separate team working on the launch stuff and production. And ideally after production, engineering is kind of done. Right? Once we're building many copies and we've kind of done all our quality checks, shouldn't change, right? Maybe if there's issues, right? And that's why I kind of put release and quality a little further into production, but it's really, ideally, you don't want to change once you start building something. It's like, hey, we're building it, it works, the business case makes sense, we've spent the money we want to spend, we spent the time we want to spend. Engineers, let's move on to the next thing, right? That's the beauty of being an engineer, is really you work before the product, right? So Jadel and I, we get to work on stuff, that's sometimes 5-6 years out, which is pretty cool, right? And doing some of these advanced studies, some of the release work for it. And again, production builds, manufacturing, marketing, sales. I think customer care and after sales. Does anyone know what that translates to on a vehicle? Yeah.
Like deciding at which mileage points that it'd be best for them to take it into the service and get the contract.
Yeah, so service is one aspect of that. Like how many when they need to come in and fix things, right? Yeah. Warranty, yes. Anyone heard of warranties? Yeah. Yeah, we hate them. We wish there was no warranties. But yeah, that's what we do have a dedicated team, obviously, to handle things. Sometimes we miss, right? And again, if you look in the future of how you can improve product development, right? Some AI, machine learning tools that can help us make sure we don't miss something, because we have oodles of data, right? We've built so many vehicle programs over the course of GM's lifetime. We would love to throw some, robotic mind on that and say, hey, use that and now look at our current plans, tell us what we're missing, right? And ideally we have that, but it's still, still at the end of the day, it's people. All these organizations are built on people and how intelligent they are, how many questions they can ask, and what's the team, those sort of things. So that was, I guess, any questions real quick on general product development? And Brian, what time is it? How much time we got?
You got 45 minutes.
Oh, perfect. Yeah. So any questions on product development? Yeah.
So approximately what proportion of GM models end up getting killed mid-production? And also, Can you give some specific examples of models that were killed at each of your
Good point. So the question was, can I give examples of like specific vehicle programs that were killed at any of these points? So technically no, because those programs never made it to the public, you can't really talk about them. But I give you examples of why they would have gotten killed. So here, these ones on the say, let's build a prototype, the main reasons we're going to kill a program there is based on cost. If something changes in the market, or we look at one of the parts we need to build this vehicle, and you're like, oh my gosh, it's going to cost way too much, we're going to kill the program and move on to something else because it's not sustainable, even though it sucks from the engineering mindset, because a lot of times those programs are super cool, super interesting, but it's like, if we can't make money off it, then we cannot continuously employ people to keep building vehicles in the future. It's kind of a catch-22, it's like, that's like what the real world people tell you about, is you can't just live and do awesome science and engineering, unfortunately. But it's interesting to think about, if you put your science hat on, it's like, okay, how do we predict things better in the future? Right? Are there cool tools we can do to do that? That's definitely why we kill things in this space. Honestly, it's very hard to kill things right before production. But what it's going to look like actually is, if they get trends, because they're going to start advertising a little bit before. If they get feelers that they're not going to be able to sell any, we may take people off it. We may, cut shifts at the plant, maybe not pay for the next year's, material and stuff, and say, hey, maybe that SSR, right? They saw that and they say, okay, 1 year, people, it's not buying on, people aren't catching on to it. We're going to kill it, right? And the killing, what do you say?
Regulations.
Yeah, regulations. That's a good one as well. Regulations are another reason we will kill programs. Because at the end of the day, we have greenhouse gas emissions are the biggest ones, but there's also safety regulations, a lot of stuff that's very expensive. And if we get to a point and we say, hey, we just can't make the regulations work with this, then we literally cannot sell it, even if the vehicle's already ready, because then we start paying millions and millions of dollars of fines. Yeah?
How often have you had to do product recalls for safety concerns?
Oh, wow. You have to ask that question. The question was, how often do we do product recalls for safety concerns? Too often. Anything more often than 0 is too often. We had a pretty major crisis in 2013, 14 about ignition switches. There was some miscommunication and faults in the engineering system. It actually birthed the whole systems engineering organization. It's something that we don't like to talk about, but internally it's a great lesson that we all take forward, because people did die from this, right? And there were huge settlements, GM lost a lot of money, but at the end of the day, we can use that to improve what we do hugely. So that was probably the biggest safety related one, but every once in a while there are definitely safety related ones, and a lot of times they're not stop driving your vehicle right now, and you see if there's some airbag, inflators or something gets wrong, that's there, or oh, there's a risk of a spark catching leaking oil because we misdesigned the oil seal. Those are usually recalls. I don't think we've had any of those in a long time. Some other companies have, but those are the type of, huh?
At least you have Ford.
Yeah. Well, at least we're not Ford, yeah. But we haven't had any of those stop driving recalls in quite a long time, which is really awesome, because safety is number one thing we do. But we do have some every once in a while that are safety related, but not super important. It's like, hey, we think this may degrade faster than normal. Over the course of the first 2 years of ownership, please drive it into the dealer and get it replaced for free. We'll give you a free car wash. So yeah, product recalls are a pretty important part of it. Yeah.
So I know with gas turbines, different. The main emissions issue is NOx. Is it carbon monoxide, or is it something else in cars?
So I'm not as familiar with the exact chemical that we're concerned about. I know NOx is usually more of an issue with our diesel trucks. And so there's actually a separate fuel canister on diesel vehicles that's it's for, what's it called? It's in DEF. Yeah, DEF. It's a chemical. DEF stands for a chemical name. But basically you kind of spray it into the exhaust, and it takes all those, what would be NOx emissions, out chemically. And you have to replace that fuel over time. It comes out as something that's inert. So the NOx is a big deal in the diesel, not as much in gas. But within the gas sector, we have catalytic converters. You guys have heard of those, right? So that's probably the biggest way that we take emission. I think there's platinum in it. It's kind of the surface is platinum, which can take some of those what would be very dangerous emissions, make them inert, and let them just go out into the road. Yeah. Yeah, so the question was, who's responsible for keeping the mission for everybody? That's all of us. There's no, I mean, the CEO at the end of the day, right? And so you'll see there's always public, internal, and public communications about why we're doing stuff. Keeps in the front of our minds, but at the end of the day, it's up to us. You know, every engineer, every manager, executive director, chief engineer, salesperson, everybody's got to remember the mission and kind of question, does this fall under our mission, right? Yeah, it's a good question.
So I'm talking about the design process. So you see like concept cars, right, which have all these extravagant features and all this groundbreaking technology that's very interesting to look at and real spectacle. So my question is, how much do you use from your concept cars, and how long does it usually take for them to be implemented into the mainstream models?
Yeah, so the question was about you guys have heard about concept cars, right? So GM actually was the first company to ever do a concept car. It was a Buick Y job decades ago. But the question was, the stuff we see in concept cars, how long does it take to get to real vehicles? That's an interesting question, because the real question is, what is the purpose of concept cars?
Yeah.
I guess we'll kind of, this is a good discussion point. What does anyone think the purpose of concept cars are? Advertising, yeah, brand awareness, that's a smaller one, yep. Anyone else? Innovation's too big. We'll get to innovation in a minute. Yeah. Innovate, yeah, prove that we are doing innovation, that's a big one. Yeah?
Does it work somewhat as a test for, like, I guess also for popularity, like for the product's like specific thing, but also like for the product itself?
Exactly. So does it resonate with consumers? I'll restate what you said. But that's really, I think, the biggest reason why we should do more concept cars is because, again, you can try to predict the future with variables and market analysis, or you can put a concept car out that is not functional, but shows what could be possible. And if you get, people are like, oh my gosh, $10,000 down payment right now, I want that in 2 years. That's pretty good, right? Okay, we should build that. But if everyone's like, oh, that's so stupid, why is GM doing that? Then they were like, okay, we won't do that sort of thing. But we actually, so my group, I'm on the innovation group, but kind of my sister groups they do the functional concept cars from GM. So we did one for the Army a few years ago, which was a fully hydrogen truck, mid-sized vehicle that worked, everything. You drive it, go off-road, hydrogen fuel cell vehicle. And that was like a functional concept vehicle. And those it's a good combination between the traditional kind of aesthetic concept vehicle, hey, here's what's in it, and hey, let's build one. Yeah, it's gonna be more expensive, and maybe it's kind of one-off technology, but if that customer then says, holy moly, this is amazing, I want 1 million more of these, that's like the best predicting the future we could possibly do, right? These kind of functional concept vehicles. So the concept vehicle thing is a really great point. There's a million reasons why you should do them. A lot of more business reasons why you shouldn't, because they're obviously expensive and they take a lot of engineering time. But at the end of the day, if you did have the resources to do it, you would always want to do it. And it comes back to if you're doing product development on your own, in the coffee mug, right? Maybe you say, oh, my hypothesis is that people want a black coffee mug. So before you do all the product development to make your own black coffee mug, maybe you take a white one and spray paint it black and go give it to people and let them use it and be like, hey, what do you think about this? Cool color, no? Yeah. And get some good market research on do people actually like this? So that's kind of what our mindset is shifting towards in the past few years is these functional technology concept vehicles that people can drive, test, our customers can use. Yeah, great question though. Yeah.
So you said that ideally the designer has contact with the consumers. What does that exactly look like? And is it possible for everyday people to contact the designer and propose an idea? Is that realistic?
Yeah, so the question was, so ideally the designers and market research people are contacting users, consumers directly. What does that look like? So we have these things called clinics, which personally not too big of a fan of, but clinics are, we're going to take a new 3D rendering of something, kind of 3D print it maybe, color it where it looks pretty real, and let people see it and be like, hey, do you like it or not? So that's one way, and our designers will go to those events and you can sign up. They're geographic, we do a lot of them in LA for some reason. But that one's tough because, just because someone says they like it doesn't mean they're going to buy it, right? Which is what we're really trying to prove, I'm sure we do a lot of stuff that people like, right? But do people, want to change their behavior for it? That's the real question. And a lot of times we pay people for clinics as well, right? So is that our real target demographic of people who are willing to spend a whole day with us for like a few $100? So that's one way, clinics. Other ways, designers. A lot of times we'll just go, on the street sometimes. Michigan, we have an office in Toronto that does a lot of this innovation work. We'll let designers go on the street and talk to people and, interview people, sometimes we'll invite people to come in for deep interviews on our campus or something, where it's not even really like, hey, here, let me show you this, do you like it? It's like, hey, what inspires you? What's your life like? What are some pain points you have in your daily life that we might be able to fix, right? I think most designers have, very much have that kind of idealistic view of that's what we should be designing for, which is good, right? Because you want them to be pulling really hard on that parachute, while the engineering organization is saying, okay, we can build this, but we like what you're saying, we're going to get as close as possible. Yeah, it's a good question on how the designers interact with people. Yeah?
Do you think a psychologist would be best figuring out what people need? Stuff like that?
So would a psychologist be best at figuring out what people need? Not sure. I don't know if we have any trained psychologists on staff who do that stuff. That's a great question. Psychologists versus people who have degrees in kind of creative design. How do you, like an artist, right? An artist is supposed to eke out feelings with, from the ethos, right? And that's what designers do for us out of blank space. So I'm not sure. Good question though. Yeah.
Have you ever had to scrap a car because of something like marketing factors and then introduce it down the road?
Interesting. Have we ever had to scrap a car because of marketing factors and then reintroduce it down the road? I'm not sure.
Probably, yeah.
Yeah, we've probably done it, yeah.
Maybe with a Corvette or something like that.
Yeah, that's a good one, yeah. So,
I've seen those.
yeah, so with the Corvette, right, a really high-performance Chevrolet vehicle, we have had to do that in the past, yeah. Combination marketing engineering, where, we might scrap a whole model year and say we're just not going to build it yet because it's, the market's not ready, or, hey, the old models, people still love it, and let's push it back a year. And so not necessarily scrap, but anytime something is not the same as the architecture we laid out, it's resources to us. Yeah?
Is the design process, or maybe the thoughts you put into a luxury vehicle, very different from than a regular one?
Definitely. Yeah, so the question is, the thoughts you put into a luxury vehicle is different from a regular vehicle, or a performance vehicle, or non-performance truck, car. Yes. So again, it's a combination of going to interview users and figuring out what inspires them, what do they need in their lives, plus what we've already proven we can do, right? And somewhere in the middle is what we end up building. So, and it's not necessarily the process is different for interviewing those people, but you're going to interview very different people, right? So a Cadillac consumer profile, we get super, super specific. We're going to say here's one, maybe this person kind of represented 30% of our Cadillac buyers. It's like a 46-year-old male who's a doctor or lawyer or accountant who wants to show off that they've made it in life and they are confident in what they drive and they like performance and they have 3 kids and a dog and going to the club on Sundays, literally that specific, right? And that person very different from a Chevrolet Corvette buyer, right? Where it's those are just hey, it's this age person who loves to drive fast and they want to they want to hear the engine, they want to go to the track day on Saturdays, but also drive it to work. And they want to go golfing. Our big thing with Corvettes is you can always fit 2 golf bags in the back. It's like a famous requirement we've had for years for the trunk size.
That's actually really cool.
Yeah. All right, last question, and we're going to move on. Yeah. Sorry, say that again? What's the plan to reach zero emissions? So it's not a hard plan. Probably the high-level strategy, but there's obviously we have another announcement. I think we're going to release 20 brand new battery electric vehicles, plug-in vehicles by 2023. That's a big part of it. But yeah. All right, so I'll move on real quick. Oh, this is the ITs telling me to update my computer. Okay. We have 54 minutes before it forces the restart. Thank you, information technology, yeah. So real quick, I'll pull all these things up here. We've already kind of talked about what's in there, but 2013 to 2019 is the road for this truck. From hey, we should build it, we want to allocate resources, engineering, releasing, building tons, which we're doing now. It's so cool to see, right? I was there when, you know, they built this massive hundreds of square foot add-on to our factory in Fort Wayne, Indiana. And I got to see it when it was just like a roof with open walls. And now it's automatic welding robots and people working and trucks moving, and like, pretty neat to see that come together at that scale. But I'll walk you through this, and again, I was kind of here from this like prototype stage, which is when I worked in the program. And my background on my computer is like a camouflaged version of the truck, because that's one I like got to touch and drive every day. So it's kind of meaningful to me. So here's the life. Like I said, there's a million stakeholders, right? So I'll read through this real quickly. But this was what, like, an example day that I would have. First shift begins at the plant, 6 o'clock. Someone's going to call me as I was in the middle of all this stuff as the program team. They're going to call me, hey, we got a no build. No one's here. They're probably sleeping because they're human beings. Get over here and help us do this, because we're not building anymore until you tell us, what the correct solution is, right? Which is fair. Then, might fix that, call some engineers, walk the floor, what other issues are popping up. There's some other stuff. I got to look for like next prototypes that are not being built, that are going to be built, approve some changes for that stuff. Get a phone call in, for a manager, frustrated with me, right? Because it's a pretty intense situation. There's a lot of tight deadlines, especially when you get to actually building things, right? You delay a build one day, you miss the time, like the 5 hours you have in this machine, right? Very difficult. Core team check-in, virtual build reviews for even further out versions of the truck, because there's a lot going on at once, right? Quality reviews, daily readiness review. Sometimes you have a part that's like way behind. We're going to have daily meetings till it's fixed, right? So we know everyone's really working hard on it. If they need any help, we're there to say, not to wait for them to say, oh, I need help. We're like, hey, tell us what to do, to an engineer. Tell us what resources you need, who you need to call, who you need to show up, whatever that is. Compartment integration review, which is a fun thing where it's like making sure the geometries and tolerances line up. Is if one person changes a part, how does that impact all the other parts around it? And like I said, it's not all quite automated yet, so we have a lot of reviews to make sure, some hose person says, hey, I need the hose to be a bigger diameter so it can fit more coolant in it, right? And the guy, who's releasing these metal parts is like, no, you can't get any bigger. My parts are right there, right? And so in the virtual world, it might work, but in reality, it's like, no, there's only tolerance of like 0.5 millimeter. No one's ever going to be able to put that hose in that location, right? So we have to resolve those issues. So here's the second half of the day here, running weekly meetings, replying to a bazillion emails, right? Being in the middle, people from all over marketing to help set up a commercial. They needed some camouflage shipped to California for a commercial for the truck. So helping with that, you get asked to do a lot of random things, which is kind of fun. You got second shift at the build floor, calling people to help get the calibration file. Again, that shows the software and electrical side. Very complex, 30 plus computers. A lot of times they brick, and you got to replace them. You need new software updates, all that sort of stuff. I want to highlight the 5 p.m. one, catching up with the builders. So it's important, yes, we work in a system with deliverables and how we work with each other, but also the human side is very important as well. No one gets anything done on their own in a big company, right? Similar to what Charles said last night, right, is like, you have to have a team that you can trust and rely on when you call, that they can help or they can contribute with you, right? So I did, try to spend intentional time with these builders on the floor. I've been building for 30, 40 years, didn't go to college, they have a few kids, learning from them, right? Learning, oh, we have some here? Learning from them and trying to get to know them. It's a very important part of getting any work done in a large company. And here, I'm here a few times, like I was in bed trying to sleep, and they would call me at like midnight. They're like, hey, we're working late. What do we do with this? I'm like, oh no. So maybe open my computer, find a file, send it to them, or something like that. So let's move a little bit and talk about innovation. So the textbook definition of innovation is the action or process of innovating. This is what I looked up online, which I think is a great definition for it, because innovation is like literally anything, honestly. But I found another definition, the introduction of something new, right? So the introduction of something new, and it's, again, super ambiguous, right? How does innovation, and how do you do that in a huge company, right? Like, can I just go talk to the CEO and say, hey, we should do this? You probably won't listen to me, right? You gotta have some credibility. It's very difficult to enact that in a new company. If you're doing a startup, right, and you can get someone to pay you $100 to develop something, you're innovative. You're doing something new, right? So it's different levels of complexity. So kind of want to put some different ways to think about something new, very ambiguous, right? It could be big or small. It could be easy or difficult for implementation. It could be introduced by one person or introduced by a team of people. And it could be introduced in a time when everybody's happy and there's extra resources to support new things. Or it could be introduced when we're laying off people because we have no money or we're about to go out of business. Right? So innovation, the point I want to make is that innovation a lot of times is not successful because it's new. It's successful because someone was able to contextualize their insertion of the innovation into a machine that would accept it or an environment that would accept it, right? And it's really more about the effort and kind of the legwork you do to do something than having some super crazy new idea, right? Those help, of course, it makes it a lot easier sometimes. But at the end of the day, if I said, hey, I think within our office building we shouldn't wear shoes because we keep getting the carpet dirty and people like seeing other people's feet, So I could come up with that idea, right, and kind of you do a cost-benefit analysis, right? Hey, what is the savings to the organization? And maybe you just change the rule. Hey, okay, you guys, on Fridays no one wears shoes, and people work harder or something before. Right? So that would be an innovation, right? It could also be I say, hey, I found this amazing new tech in Boston, right? This machine learning, assistant, in-vehicle assistant for the car, right? Some AI. And so that would be something new to a lot of our programs. So the many months long of meetings with people internally, putting together the value proposition of it, and communicating it is a big thing, right? I'm really good at putting one-page slides together now, because that's the easiest way to communicate within GM. Is say, hey, I found this thing, here's kind of one pager that shows what it is, why it's important, how much it's going to cost, what the next steps might be, right? So contextualizing and communicating is very important. But at the end of the day, right, I'm an innovator within GM because it's in my title, but everybody can be an innovator, but it's really not about coming up with new ideas. It's just about doing new things, right? Which a lot of times don't need brand new ideas. So the balance here, right, is balancing how big of a bite you think you can take with some of the realities of how you get that done, right? So do you plan it forever, right? Super radical, or just keep planning so it'll be perfect one day, or you just make decisions like, hey, we gotta start building today, guys. We can't just sit in this room and keep coming up with better and better ideas. We gotta start delivering something. Perfect or first. This is a huge one within product development innovation. If we have a brand new technology, we probably want to release it in a very, very conservative, de-risked state where the customer would never have an issue. But a lot of times, look at Teslas, they're great vehicles, but they have a lot of quality issues, but people don't care. They're like, hey, that's cool tech, they're the first ones to show me this new radical design, I'm still going to buy it. So that makes everyone in our organization scratch our heads because we're like, what? Look at all the quality issues, no one would ever buy it, they'd hate it. And then we see people keep buying, it's like, oh shoot, okay, people don't care about quality as much for certain technologies. So kind of changing where we put that slider. More features, or actually profitable. That's probably the one that kills a lot of programs. It's like, hey, we can't put that on there, we're not going to make money. If we don't make money, we won't be in business, right? Again, kind of the harsh realities of life thing. This other one's interesting too, because if you think about divvying up the product development requirements, right, those blocks and the arrows I showed, maybe as an engineer you might say, okay, I want to have very clear handoffs between groups. Okay, you do exactly this, right, and then you hand it off to this person. But that doesn't really inspire people. If you get a job that says, hey, I want you to draw this box 500 times and then put those into the next box, it's like why can't I use a printer? But if we're like, no, you're going to draw it because that's what we architected in the plan, that's not very inspiring, right? And if you don't have an inspired workforce or inspired employees working, the company's just going to fail. And that's your company culture is a big piece of that, right? So, but it's also difficult because how do you let all those people, every single person in the organization, innovate, do things differently, but also still spit out a product at the end, right? Because you got to have some discipline. And then again, the scope of change and willingness to accept change, right? I can't just go walk into the CEO and say, hey, we should build a 20-wheeled, rover thing for people's farms, right? But maybe I could go to the wheel guy and say, hey, can we use this maybe more economically favorable rubber in our tires, right? He don't want to make the connection to technology, right? I can probably get that done. But the other one, man, it'd be so much work to try to get that even accepted into the organization, right? So it's kind of the debate, I guess. Let me think. Yeah. So I'll finish up the slide and then we'll just kind of have a little discussion again about innovation versus the discipline stuff. So again, the pros of structured product development are this repeatable success. You know, you have a structured way to learn from the hard knocks. When we fail, right, that organization can say, okay, we can do it differently the next time within our bucket, right, our box. You ease career transitions. You know, if you come work for General Motors, you want to move around. A lot of times people only stay in a job 1-2 years within GM, right? But still, we somehow are able to, you know, keep making vehicles relatively well. We're not the best, but it's a cool thing to come work and say, oh, I just want to change jobs all the time. And that's enabled because we have great documentation processes for someone who's new to a job to get up and running quickly. And that's really an advantage of the really structured product development. Condensing decades of learning, similar thing. And then again, the incremental process innovation, right? So if you can dictate to someone with an engineer, say, hey, you're releasing this part, but you know, improve that process as much as possible, right? But you can't really change the part because the part's got to go in the car in a year, right? Pros of unstructured, right? This kind of ambiguous innovation. You can also replace this with like how startups work. Because there are no rules in startups, right? You don't have like a playbook. You're just kind of making things work. But everybody's encouraged to challenge the status quo. You can do really quick, rapid iteration and analysis as opposed to us, right? We go very slowly because we have to be able to make 1 million of something a year, every year for 6 to 7 years. So to do that, right, you have to be very conservative in your approach and move pretty slowly. And then finally, the closer collaboration between teams, right? The smaller the team, the more you know people, you know, say, oh, hey, I know Cindy, I can call her up and see how she feels about this change. At GM, sometimes you gotta like look in the org chart or say, hey boss, do you know who this person who owns the part is? Can you introduce me to them? That sort of thing. So now I want to open up. What are someone's thoughts? I've tried to kind of put 2 different sticks in the sand here with like super like architected product development at scale, and then like innovation, which is challenging that, right? What are anyone's thoughts on how to balance that, how to do that successfully, you know, other things to think about? Yeah.
I feel like a lot of companies or organizations start off with like a big innovation, something that they think is like really, like let's take Ford for example. They're like the concept of like the way that they design their vehicles at first, and then like once you get that off, you use that same system, you like tweak it a little bit and a little bit more, and you keep going with it to maximize the profits because in the end, I think what matters more than like customer satisfaction is the profits. So for that,
Hey, I mean that's how we get to keep making new vehicles. Is you know, you have to be profitable to keep paying people. Yeah.
But then I feel like there's maybe it's like the extinctions. Like it just like there's like a huge innovation and then like it keeps going and keeps making money puts up to it. And that's how like historically I think it happens. But I might not be right.
Yeah, that's a good perspective. He said historically he thinks that it's more successful when you go take the risk, put the huge innovation out there, and even if it doesn't work perfectly, you just start iterating off it instead of kind of like slowly leading up to the big innovation, right? That's what you're saying. Yeah, that's a good way to think about it. Who else? Ben?
Using the card. No, I mean, I think, I guess thinking back towards Apple, you know, they have the iPhone, like the new big thing. I mean, it's not very stable when it was first released, but then they kept on making it better and better. And they just kind of like, they're kind of due for something, I suppose. They kind of stagnated as a company. They kind of outgrown.
Yeah. Yeah,
I feel like
again,
we need new innovations every once in a while to keep on pushing forward as a company.
yeah, good point. So again, it's the same kind of some arguments where you're saying like, hey, you gotta just like get over the risk factor. Just do it, even if it's painful, it doesn't work perfectly, and then, you know, kind of build off of that instead of incremental stuff. Yeah.
I know a lot of companies are doing, I don't know if you guys have heard of, like those little buildings that they have where professionals, instead of working in their office building, will go to another building with a different environment, lots of different people, and just work there for a while so they can have change of scenery and kind of allows you to freshen up. So getting away from your work environment while working, getting new ideas, and just like having that structure, but then changing it up every once in a while so you stay quick on your feet and stuff.
That's perfect. And that's ideally, I would love, that would be what the HR innovation of a company can innovate with, right? Maybe they're not in the core product development, but they're like, hey, how do we make all of our people think differently? Let's set up something where they can go work at a different location, or, you know, a fancy co-working space with like kombucha and coffee, and let them go work one day a week, right? And that's kind of like empowering the organization from the bottom up, as opposed to saying, hey, we're going to pick like a super crazy innovation product in the sand. Yeah, awesome idea. Anyone else? Yeah.
I think people can become, and it's basically very similar to what they've said before, but if there's a very new innovation that nobody's come up with before, then people can be excited. Like I'm thinking GoFundMes and Kickstarters, people can fund them themselves because they're excited about the innovation, and then if it becomes popular enough, they can branch off and create like varieties of products.
Yeah, I think that's, so she said, you know, the kind of the Kickstarter model, right? It's like, hey, can you get people to pre-commit and fund you because they actually are committing to an idea? Which is the same thing Tesla did with their deposits, I think, for the Model 3. They said, hey, give us a deposit, we'll reserve your spot in line. It's like, hey, I mean, we could do that too, right? But everyone with GM's like, oh, why would we do that? We have our Model S work, right? But I thought it was amazing because, one, they got a lot of extra cash to develop stuff, right? Free cash early is nice. They also have people who are committed to buying the product, right? That's one of the biggest risks we deal with is like, we can predict in the future, will people buy this or not, right? Is it, you know, does it resonate? So yeah, I like the Kickstarter model and kind of putting it out there first before it's even finished, kind of like the concept vehicle thing, is a great thing. So real quick, I'll wrap up with some takeaways. So priorities different depending on the scale. Product development at the end of the day is just an input-output model, right? It's a lot of recipe, a few leaders kind of architecting it, and then you output some measurable product that you can, you know, transact to somebody which changes their behavior. And again, innovation is rarely a new idea, right? It's just someone's hard work to develop an application or integrate an existing idea. And then give some credit to things that feel old and stodgy. It's kind of a personal lesson because I came into GM like, this is so dumb, such an old company, I hate these people who don't understand what they're doing. But over time, you start to realize, okay, they, you know, this is the structure they've kind of grown up with, some empathizing with them, right? It's like, okay, yes, they're an old-style organization, but some of that exists for the right reasons, right? And some of it doesn't, which is why you kind of choose that stuff and you try to change it from the bottom and innovate. But at the end of the day, like some things that have been around a long time, you know, give them just a little bit of the benefit of the doubt. Because I used to be like, no, anything that's been around a long time should just, like, we should kill it off and start new. But there's some good stuff to be learned from it. And again, you know, developing a product is hard but not impossible. You know, you guys can all go do this in college. Universities have massive, like, free money, honestly. Free money to give to you guys to go start building something, interviewing customers, all that sort of stuff. So if you're thinking about different extracurriculars to do in college, it's kind of a fun thing to go try. I've mentored a lot of students at MIT doing this, and I know they grow as a person a lot and have a really good perspective when they can go into the workforce or go into academia, but really thinking about how do you develop a product and how do you think about that. So I'll end it there and say we have a few minutes left for questions. Three questions, all right. Yeah.
I noticed how demanding your schedule is, like when you guys are working on the products, like how do you keep up with that? You're not getting very much sleep, you're always, like, you always have to be like 100%, like how do you keep up with that first?
I mean, there's the normal things like coffee and you kind of like unwind when you can on weekends and stuff. But the big one too is like making sure you are really good friends with the people you work with. Because then those like 15, 16-hour days are like not that bad anymore because you're kind of hanging out with people. Like when I build a relationship with the builders and these older guys who know everything about cars, I just sit there and kind of ask them about cars. Like, oh, that's like, I didn't know anything about cars before GM. But working on this program, working on stuff, you just ask people questions. So I think the best way to get over that, you know, because it is necessary sometimes, just make sure you are having fun, right? If you come to work and you just have to like, you know, draw the squares on paper for 16 hours a day by yourself, that kind of sucks, right? And maybe, you know, maybe coffee is your only hope at that point. But make sure you like the people you work with.
And also add that it doesn't always happen.
Yeah, it doesn't always happen, yeah. This was like one of the more extreme schedules, but on average, like, and it's all temporal too, right? When we start building, it's going to be really, maybe a month or two really high. It won't get too bad. But yeah, there are times when it gets pretty rough. Yeah?
So you talked about how GMs kind of come
company purpose has changed from building the perfect car to kind of some bigger ideas. Why do you think these like big companies have begun to adopt kind of societal problems and to take on this role as like the arbiter of everything that's wrong with our society? And do you think that customers are ever kind of disillusioned because like it may seem like beyond their scope?
Yeah, so great. The first question was, why is it that big companies, GM included, have tried to kind of like take on these societal impact things, right? I think there's a few pieces. One is employees. People like myself and Jadelle, like, we don't care about cars. We care about the impact, right? So if GM wants to get the best employees to work for them, they need to like do something like meaningful for like humanity, right? Which is very inspiring to like when they change that, it's like, okay, we're good. You know, like I'm happy to work for this company. The other part, like investors, is one that's kind of changing as well, where investors want to say, hey, like I'm spending money to make money, but I'd also kind of like to make an impact. Like maybe I feel bad about making all this money. So I think that's a piece of it too. But also, I mean, the bar is just higher, right? The bar, you know, every decade a business is still in business, or like businesses are formed, decade in, you know, humanity. Like the bar is higher for what you need to do with your resources, right? And it's not enough to just make money anymore. Like you got to make money and do good for the world, which like personally I love, right? And I think everyone else feels good about it, right? I mean, I think a lot of people, older people in the organization are like, okay, I can finally say like we're doing it, right? Instead of like being like kind of, you know, oh, you can never justify doing good, it's got to make money, right? So a ton of different things. And remind me, what was your second question?
Oh, do you think customers are ever like disillusioned because these ideals seem too lofty and beyond the scope of the company?
Yes, yeah. Yeah. I mean, yeah, we always, as product people, we always think the customer like doesn't know what's best for them, they're disillusioned. And that's like kind of the job if you want to get into communications and marketing. That's like what their job is, to communicate what we're doing and why, right? All right, one more question over here.
Okay, so you mentioned like a project for a hydrogen fuel cell truck for the Army. What happened with that project?
So, can't speak on future product progress, but publicly announced we re-registered GM Defense LLC. And the Army, you know, offhand, they loved it. They kept coming back to Michigan and having our engineers fix it because they used it too hard. But they you know, really good feedback, and we started an organization to focus on fuel cell for defense applications. So
could that be in like commercial use too?
Fuel cell, we do look at fuel cells for commercial use. We don't have anything officially in the product plan, but we've done a really big, if you think about fuel cells overall, we've done, like GM has done a really good job kind of automotivizing it, just making it small, packaged, you know, robust. Can we make a bunch of them and, you know, maybe even work on the supply chain stuff. It's out there because at the end of the day, hydrogen is more energy dense than current batteries, both from a weight and a cost perspective. But again, right, the United States infrastructure is just not there to release a commercial passenger vehicle right now. So, all right, thank you very much.